bottom line of astrology is understanding and appreciating and applauding and supporting the human being. These planets are guides. Solar arc is magic, and it's been so for thousands of years. Our objective is not the multiplicity of measurements, but the assimilation of key measurements. I call them the big bells. Big time, big loud bells ring in our lives when we have solar arcs involving the sun, the moon, or an angle. The planets are guidelines to us to help us learn about life. The fear of counseling is our lack of confidence that we have anything significant to say. We must be practical more than we must be exact in order to be enrichingly engaged in the progress and development of your client. We're going to explore rectification as a process, not to be correct, but to be valid. You're close to a miracle in divining the birth time. All of this is a hunt, an exciting, challenging hunt. This is where everything you know about astrology and life, everything comes to play. You will be quite knowing about it all. And I welcome you to this circle of understanding. And we as astrologers are privileged to know how to find the portrait among the planets. There are several places in our study of astrology where we see magic. It's in the management of time. Long ago and far away in Sumeria, these people, very sophisticated in trigonometry, geometry, were trying to find the area of a circle. It took a long time to define the area of a circle. Initially, they inscribed geometric figures they could control, like the triangle, inscribed it into that area of the circle, and by displacing the empty space within it, they tried to give articulation to the whole. In the process, they came up with an idea of units that defined the circle. Scholars think they named these sectors, these small points all the way around the circle, something called kve, or something like that. These were what we called degrees. And because they were working on a sexagesimal system, it turned out that 360 of these measured a totality, the circumference of the circle. Now, I'm not going to get very, very technical with this, but I wanted you to know how the magic begins. Because the 360 kve, or degrees, is tantalizingly close to what was known as 365.25 days in the year. Start to feel that? Is there some relationship between those two? They also knew that in every 4 minutes of time, 1 degree of sun movement takes place at the midheaven. Let me show you that. It's very simple. 360 degrees multiplied by 4 minutes gives us 1,440 minutes. Divided by 60, we have 24 hours. So this magical equation had many dimensions of support. So we could actually say that 1 degree of sun movement equates approximately to 1 year. So there's a leap of logic here that links all of these concepts. We can say 1 degree equals 1 day, sun motion, right? Equals 1 year. So simple. But what a leap of logic. What a tremendous set of deductions. You know, routinely in astrology, this is called secondary progressions. Well, it can get a lot more sophisticated, and I'm going to tell you that now. All sorts of mathematical refinements by very, very gifted mathematicians and astronomers took place over the years. We know the system that emerged as secondary progressions. A day for a year is how we abbreviate it. So we're talking about a lot of magic over a long period of time. But there's a problem with secondary progressions. As you do your next secondary progression chart, be aware of how little movement takes place with the outer planets. Oh, really from Jupiter on out. Our life development is a lot more complex and swift. And we need the symbolism of those outer planets to help us understand development within time. Everybody was really intrigued with getting this primal equation of 1 degree, 1 day, 1 year together. It was a very, very important challenge to the great minds of the day. You know about Valentino Naboda, or Naibod as we write it today, N-A-I-B-O-D. He made a tremendous deduction that if you took the average speed of the sun, because the sun varies in speed daily throughout the year, more about that in a moment. But if you took that average speed and used it to track the sun in one person's development, now you'd be scoring a lot of points. You'd get closer to the magic. But it really didn't work well. It failed half the time, speaking generally. Now let me explain why that is so. The sun moves faster in diurnal motion between September and March all over the world. It is slower between March and September. It is slower than 1 degree per day for birth dates between March and September, anywhere in the world. And I suggest we avoid referring to seasons because those seasons are reversed on the other half of the world, in the other half of the world. So we have an even arc, almost 1 degree for 1 day, which is comfortable. You can generalize with it just by looking at the horoscope, and I'm going to show you how to do that shortly. When you're born between September and March. But with the slower movement of the sun, using this symbolism, over a span of 30 years, there is an accumulation error of 1 degree, which is 1 year. So it takes 31 years of development to amass 30 degrees of symbolism. of progress of the sun. If you're 60 years old, you're born in August, for example, it'll take 62 years to amass an arc of 60 degrees. That's a little hard to talk about and conceptualize, but when you just live with it for a week or so and you'll have it, and you'll feel comfortable with it. So with Naboth's average, he was missing half the people. So still they had a challenge. And it went on and on and on until about 1850, when a brilliant horary astrologer named Simonite in England said, why don't we take this different speed of sun and measure it precisely for each person and get a thing called solar arc. And then why don't we apply it uniformly to every planet in the natal horoscope so that all planets proceed uniformly in individualistic development. Wow. The magic in full bloom. I think that's extraordinary. It's a marvelous, marvelous thought. Let me review it again. Here's a natal horoscope. These are just 3 arbitrary planets. We determine the age of the person in the present time, say 36 years old. And what we want to do is see how far that sun has progressed from the moment of birth to that same birth moment reference in this present year. So if you're born in December, it's going to be about 36 degrees. Calling that the solar arc, let's call that Y. That planet will then go forward that distance to its second position, its solar arc position. Same for that planet, the same increment. This planet, the same increment going to its solar arc position. All of those solar arc positions are in an outer ring. Again, it's wordy to explain it, but you live with it for just a little bit and you'll see the idea. It's beautiful to take the individualistic speed of development of the individual sun and apply that arc to all the points and planets within the horoscope uniformly so that they go click, 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 and they get all in place again. But they don't lose their reference to each other. That's wonderful. That's really very, very exciting to me. So we have a horoscope development chart that reflects the individual sun, whether he or she was born between September and March or March and September. Everything is advanced equally. The distance of the solar arc to our developmental moment in time. Magic. Now, what is fascinating is this takes care of this slower planet problem because you are developing those solar arc positions just as you would for Mercury, a fast-moving planet. The intrinsic speed of the planets means nothing in solar arcs. It is the sun that is the basis. It is the sun that energizes the advance. Okay? Don't let it be a problem. Would you believe that this allows about 1,652 new relationships between the planets and their natal neighbors. Honestly, that's staggering. You don't have to learn 1,652 things, images. I've written them all out with suggested meanings for you in the appendix of my book on solar arcs, in the appendix of Synthesis and Counseling in Astrology. And I've taken that appendix and I've had it put into a little travel form, and I have it all the time when I need it. But after a while, with some familiarity and some principles I will share with you in a few moments, you will be able to live within the symbolism and not have to spend tons of time looking everything up. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. We can take this solar arc movement and relate it even to natal midpoints between planets. We have solar arc positions that relate planets to natal angles, to sun, to the moon, to each other. It's very, very exciting. In our discussions of solar arcs, these measurements, what we do is we use the word equals. If I say sun equals midheaven, or Uranus equals Venus, or Saturn equals Neptune, this automatically is saying that there is a solar arc relationship in play. The equal sign means conjunction, square, opposition, quindecile, remember we learned that already, 165 degrees, semi-square or sesquiquadrate. No sextiles, no trines allowed. They keep things as they are, and we all want change and drama. And that's these big babies here. Got it? This is basically fourth harmonic astrology from here up. Now, this is when things happen. I can probably stand tall and say to you that nothing significant, important, highly motivational in the life occurs without some arc that touches the sun, the moon, or an angle. It's a major statement. Big time, big loud bells ring in our lives when we have solar arcs involving the sun, the moon, or an angle. Sure, there are arcs between the planets as well, and they are icing on the cake. They fill out the picture. We are able to look at a horoscope and go backwards in time. Say I'm looking at that 36-year-old's horoscope. I can look back just by simple subtractions of 1 degree for a day, for a year. And I can go back and say, well, 11 years ago, what was that great rewarding time that you had? Did you get the recognition you deserved? That would be a Jupiter solar arc to the ruler of his midheaven or to the midheaven itself. Okay, let's just pause there for a moment, and I'm going to invite you over here to look over my shoulder, and we can study some simple arcs and get familiar with arcs with our eyes. Now let's look at Queen Victoria's horoscope. Imagine her astrologer. He was probably a very skinny, aquiline man dressed in black with a hooded shoulder cape. And he probably came to her most deferentially and said, "We must prepare you for your rise to power." Now, she was only like 17 or 18 years old. But what did he see in her horoscope? This was the time when Simonite was doing all the experimentation in England and reviving astrology in mid-19th century in England. He was dynamite. And I have had the privilege of reading his first edition book on solar arcs. It's really breathtaking to hold that in your hands. Well, now back to the conference with the astrologer and Queen Victoria to be. Here's her horoscope. Don't worry about this cluster. We're not analyzing her horoscope right now. We're looking at one very important measurement. You can see very clearly that the midheaven by solar arc will advance to this Jupiter. Now that is simple success. Dun, da, 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 bum, bum. Midheaven equals Jupiter is a time when most people get the signal from the universe that they deserve recognition. If you're in line for the throne, you're going to be sitting on it shortly. The odds are with you. And he says to Queen Victoria to be, "Madam, please, I predict that it is going to happen shortly." Now the distance here, what's that, 2953? Let's call it, of Capricorn, call that 0 Aquarius, just generally. And this Jupiter is at 16 Aquarius and 55 minutes, which is almost, let's call that 17. The arc distance is actually 17 degrees and 18 minutes. Your computer will do all this in a flasherino. And what we have is at age 17, midheaven equals Jupiter. Now let's see what that looks like when we really do it in detail, and the computer prints out the double ring chart. Notice how the midheaven has come to this position as we anticipated, right on that Jupiter. Now, solar arcs provide a backdrop to development and advancement. Within that backdrop time period, and we'll do a detailed study of that in a moment, there's going to be a transit trigger. Now, would you believe that for Queen Victoria, when we had midheaven Jupiter, midheaven equals Jupiter as a backdrop, we also had transiting Jupiter at precisely 16 Leo 06, exactly opposite this very important Jupiter realm in her life development. At the same time, the secondary progressed moon was precisely on the midheaven. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, isn't that beautiful? Wow. Let's jump to another queen, Queen Elizabeth II, the present Queen Elizabeth. See this sun down here? 0 Taurus. Well, in 25 years, this sun is going to equal the midheaven. It's a nice opposition there. Was this when she became queen? The odds are with you that it was. This was a very powerful time. Anytime you relate the sun dynamically by solar arc to the midheaven, to that angle, which is status and prominence in life, you are really cooking with gas, as my father used to say. It's hot. Let's take a look at it precisely. This sun came to the fourth cusp by solar arc precisely when George VI, Elizabeth's father, died. Precisely. This was when she was immediately named queen. What followed normally, and it did then, was an interregnum period, a period between reigns where all kinds of things happen. In her case, it was the preparation throughout the world for the first international live telecast with that new invention, television, for her crowning. Now that took place 18 months later after her father died, after she was named queen, after solar arc sun equals midheaven took place. It happened when the midheaven advanced to 21 Sagittarius opposite the sun-moon midpoint, which is so important. We will talk about that shortly, at 21 Gemini. So you had this period of 18 months of enormous rise into power and into history. That's beautiful. What's written over here is the sun-moon midpoint, which I stress should be on every horoscope aspect grid of every serious astrologer in the world forever. It's a terribly important, sensitive spot. Isn't that something? Wow, you're already using solar arcs. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the sun-moon midpoint, and then we'll come back and do a few more of these exercises and get them more sophisticated for our eyes. It's so crucially important. Let me explain why. And in the process, I'm starting to illustrate for you how you can easily start to gain facility with the interpretation of arcs to the sun, to the moon, and their midpoint. The sun is the masculine, the father, the male. The moon is the feminine, the mother. They're your parents. We know analytically that if the sun and moon are square to each other under high developmental tension, say within 2 degrees orb, as we've discussed in an earlier DVD, the parents were very, very tense when your client was born. They may have tried to abort the child. Their personal circumstances were resentful of a child being born. And very often the parents, one of them especially, the mother, will use it as a punitive statement to the child growing up. We never wanted you. Now look what's happened. How quickly you're getting into a deep developmental tension construct in your client's life. Just because the sun and the moon are square. That's the signal to us. And when we know about life, comes out and becomes helpful to the client. Okay. Sun, moon, midpoint can be then anywhere. Doesn't have to be because they're square or anything like that. You can have a trine between the sun and the moon. But the midpoint is a place where the arcing planets, like Saturn, will come in and get into the mix. It's like a new herb in your spaghetti sauce. That Saturn is going to affect sun-moon symbolism of relationships in your client's adult life. If it occurs when the client is 6 years old, say, it's going to be in the parent's life, around the child. Maybe it's the background measurement of a divorce. So you see that Saturn equals sun, moon becomes a very powerful statement in relationships. And I'll whisper to you a secret. It's the same thing when it's a transit as well. Transiting Saturn, squaring or conjoining the sun-moon midpoint, says the same thing. The difference is that the transit happens a little more quickly, lasts a shorter length of time, because the arc will last for a year. 1 degree for 1 year. Now, there are 12 months in the year. And we know very, very well then that the arc gradually focuses 5 minutes of distance per month. Let me show you that. Visually, it's easier to understand. If I have 1 year from January to July to December, that's 1 degree. Remember, 1 degree, 1 day, 1 year. And there are 12 months. So the arc development is going to be 60 minutes divided by 12, which is 5 minutes per month. So if you have an arc that takes place in March, where will it be in July? It'll be April, May, June, July, 4 times 5 minutes, 20 minutes of arc further on. Still hot. This is why it's so important to recognize the triggering transit that occurs within this span of time. You have a good orb here. 1 year, 60 minutes. If the arc is exact, say in March, but you have a trigger transit like Uranus coming to the ruler of the 7th house, and that happens in September, those times are linked, March to September. It's a gradualism. After all, when were your parents divorced? Was it last Thursday? 2 weeks ago? 2 months before? Or before they got married? All right, let's get back here. What happens when Uranus comes to the sun-moon midpoint by 4th harmonic? When it equals the sun-moon? Remember? Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. Splitsville, the independence, the autonomy of one person in the marital mix, perhaps, is developing away from the compromise essential in relationships. How many times do you hear, well, I outgrew my marriage? When Neptune equals the sun-moon midpoint, what's introduced is bewilderment, drugs, unfaithfulness, alcoholism, some difficult concepts. If the person is an artist, it can be very, very strongly idealistic or visionary. If Pluto comes in, you've got a power struggle. There's no two ways to look at it. So something must be learned from these periods of time. And this is why tracking development in time is so vitally important. The objectification of the progress within time allows the bloom of individuation. Nice, huh? I love solar arcs. I love to feel that I'm participating with my client in the natural development of their life. And if I can hold up a mirror and help explain the significance of the events encountered in their personal realities, at those times, I feel I'm doing my job. I'm doing a good service. Let's take another look at some more horoscopes, okay? This is the horoscope of handsome Prince William of the UK. The double ring chart is shown for a time in his life in August 1997, when his mother, Princess Diana, was killed in that tragic auto crash. Now, notice in his horoscope this cluster in the 9th house. That cluster is going eventually to come over the midheaven. Someday he will have Pluto equals midheaven. That's 24 Libra, and this is 2 Scorpio, so that's at age 8. Well, that was probably taken up by his parents somehow. He's too young to have been doing anything. But en route to that, we have a very difficult time with Mars, which is high and strong energy, a blow of a hammer, if you will, coming to Pluto. See that? 9 Libra at age 16, 16 degrees later, 15 degrees later, we have Mars equals Pluto. Pluto rules the midheaven, his status. His status certainly changed immediately. This was a blow in history. When Diana was killed, all eyes turned not to Prince Charles, but to his successor, his son, William. It's a big saga, a big discussion started all over the United Kingdom, and it still goes on to this day. And I have predicted for a long, long time, well annotated, that Charles will step aside, that he will not be king. William is next. But patience. Let's look at Saturn coming to Jupiter. Anytime Saturn and Jupiter are mixed in synthesis, you're getting a sense of purpose. So that sense of purpose is born out of this catastrophe. All of a sudden, he grew up, didn't he? I'm sure he did. He's saying, my goodness, history is being put upon my shoulders. See that? Saturn exactly equals Jupiter. And that Jupiter is the ruler of his ascendant. And so all of this Saturn rulership strength, remember Queen Elizabeth had natal Saturn right on her midheaven? I've researched 300 years of monarchs in the UK, in England, and I'll tell you, that's one of the key measurements, a relationship of Saturn to the midheaven. Naturally, I get excited about this. I hope you don't mind. Notice how the sun over here was arcing to conjunction of the nodal axis. The nodal axis in solar arcs, although it goes backwards, retrograde motion and backward movement has no role in solar arcs. Everything is sent forward into time in the counterclockwise motion. This means public event. A public hammer blow to the ambition, structure of young Prince, giving him a sense of purpose, perhaps too early in his life. With experience, you're going to be able to see something like this within 20 seconds. Let's look at his brother's horoscope, Prince Harry. Notice he has Saturn near the midheaven as well. I'm telling you, this stuff runs in the family. And here we have Pluto arcing to Saturn. See that? He was 12 years old. Oh my goodness. Anytime you have Pluto equals Saturn by square or quindicile arc or conjunction, or Saturn equals Pluto, equals means all those other aspects as well, strong aspects, heavy aspects, developmentally powerful aspects. You are dealing with some extraordinary loss that is essential and necessary to continued growth. We have yet to get the answer to that in relation to Prince Harry, but when his mother was killed in that crash, Pluto equaled Saturn, and Pluto ruled his midheaven. You see the symbolisms of this. Believe in them. Anytime that Neptune comes to an angle by arc, or squares an angle, or quindiciles an angle, you're dealing with a bewilderment, a loss of ego focus, possibly even a breakdown of identity. When Diana, his mother, was killed in that car crash, with Pluto equals Saturn, with Pluto ruling the midheaven, at that same time, we had Neptune on his ascendant by arc. It's precise. Look at that. Wow. At the same time, we have Uranus, which is bzzz, intensification of individuation. Uranus was equaling, there's your square. All you have to, it makes no difference what the aspect is as long as it's one of those heavy-duty, high-tension aspects. So we say equals. Don't worry whether it's a square or a conjunction. Uranus brings its symbolic intensification of energy to the sun. Exactly. 22 mutable, 22 mutable. Bang. Clear? I hope so. What a lot of weight on the shoulders of a 12-year-old. Fascinating, isn't it, those two boys? Let's talk a little bit more, and we'll come back and have a third round with some horoscopes shortly. Please now, let's look at your horoscope. I'm sure you have it with you right there. Especially now, let's just keep it simple. Let's pretend you're going to possibly be Queen Victoria shortly. Let's look for a planet of strong symbolism in your 9th, 12th, 3rd, or 6th house. I've picked those positions because these planets are the first to advance and touch angles in your development. Let me talk to you now about each individual planet and take your pick in relation to what you see in your own life. When we have Mercury equaling an angle, this is going to emphasize travel, communications, writing, learning, schooling, and anything along those lines that can be seen as well in the houses ruled by Mercury. It also has to be dependent on your age at the time. If you were 6 or 7, it was your first school experience that you remember. If you're 20, it might be a shift of major if you went to college. If your natal 9th house ruler or planets within it were highly stressed when you were born, the chances are your education was interrupted. So an arc of Mercury coming to the midheaven might be a time when you make up for that break in education. You might go back to school. It has to fit a pragmatic, practical perspective. If you feel that there is nothing occurring at that time, don't throw this study out the window. Just say, I'll go on to other measurements. You have to be in the right position to make these things bright in your life. If it's Venus, and the distance coming to your midheaven, or 7th cusp, or ascendant, or 4th cusp, this Venus factor is a very positive appearing signal. It's often, if you're childbearing age, male or female, when a child is born. It can be, for a younger person, it can be somebody special in the school environment at age 6, say it's a 6-degree advance, that was especially caring. And you remember that person enormously. If it's Mars, also, Mars is allied with the birth of a child, often, for the male horoscope or the female horoscope. But normally it's high energy drive. It's making things happen. You study the Mars in the natal horoscope in its sign, and you get you become aware of what kind of energy this person likes to use, characteristically. With Jupiter, it's recognition, potential, success, getting the raise you've always wanted. Nice things, normally. It can also be educational. Say that Jupiter rules the 9th house. Say your client is a writer. Your client is 42. That would be an awfully long arc, but it could come from the 8th house, cross over the 9th, accumulate experience, come to the midheaven, bang, a book contract? See how it starts to work? With Saturn coming to an angle, especially the midheaven, but really the ascendant, the 4th cusp, the 7th cusp, take your pick. These are very live, wired antennae. That Saturn intrudes to make conspicuous change signals possible. And you would have to ask, say this happened when a young person was 11. Say it's an 11-degree arc. Saturn equals one of the angles. You would have to ask, what was the difficulty at that time? Was someone taken out of the picture, one way or another? Your client will say, oh my, that's when my uncle died. Or that's when my family got divorced. Well, why is that so important? And he'll or she'll respond, because my uncle gave me more attention than my father. And I miss him to this day. Anytime Uranus is involved with conspicuous angular development, by conjunction or by square, within the solar arc ideas or transit ideas, you can expect relocation almost always. It can be escapist, like getting out of Dodge. It can be finding a new level in life and taking your family to that level. It can be overspending a promotion at work and getting a new home. And Neptune again is the bewilderment. When this Neptune angular hit, or Neptune sun moon hit, takes place in a young person, say 9 years old or 15, they're so bewildered and they don't understand it. Something's going on around them that confuses their own individual identity. They rush into a room and grab a book and close the door and cry. Alone time can be very, very imbalancing. This arc will last a year. Transits within that time period will punctuate it. Sometimes it's very, very, very difficult to forget, to put aside. One very good question to ask your client about difficult times is, please share with me what you think you have brought forward from that time to now. And immediately, your client's maturity, perspective, life development shows itself. Show themselves, excuse me. Now, if it's Pluto, everything is going to change. Unless there's very, very tight controls on it to keep it as it is. I hope you're getting a flavor of what these arcs suggest. Now remember, they don't have to always be linked to an angle. These arcs function as symbols of development when they relate to each other. Now, I don't have to tell you necessarily why Sun equals Venus can be most enjoyable. If it happens when you're 5 or 6, it's something special, somebody caring for you in a special way. If it happens when it's 13 or 14, it's a precocious first infatuation. If it's at age 16, 17, it's usually the first love. And I have invariably said, why was that so important? And the client will respond, at age 50. And I still think about it today. In fact, I've had people say, and you know what? I received a telephone call 3 months ago from that man or that woman. Their spouse has died, and I guess they're remembering old times the way I do. Fascinating, isn't it? I want to caution you about the easy trap to fall into in interpretation. Transits, the real-time positions of the planets, where they are today, cannot relate to secondary progressed positions or solar arc positions within the horoscope. You cannot say, well, I have transiting Uranus square to secondary progressed moon or to solar arc Venus. They don't work. And really, we are preserving our position with our head above the waters of measurements, because you would have so many. You would drown in them. Our objective is not the multiplicity of measurements, but the assimilation of key measurements. I call them the big bells. And I trust the smaller bells around it. And what happens is, if you keep it there and rely on your client to help you understand with them their life, you're doing an artistic analysis that is very helpful. Make sense? Good. Please remember as well that practically 100% of all solar arcs big bell measurements will have a trigger transit attached to it, so you can identify the month when you think it probably would take place. This helps your client remember things. For example, in my horoscope, as we'll take another look at it in a moment, I have the midheaven coming to Saturn at age 9.5. And that Saturn is opposed by Neptune in the 4th house, and Neptune rules my midheaven. So there's a tremendous spine of anxiety in my home development. And I remember my mother and the soon-to-become my stepfather coming to pick me up from summer camp when I was that age. And I was just filled with excitement because I loved the camp, went there for many years, and I was filled with myself. And I was happy to see my mother. And I wanted to share with her the things that I had accomplished. Probably grew 3 inches that summer and had a good tan, you know that feeling, and running up to the car and embracing them when they arrived. Well, Mother had a different idea. My mother, not knowing that we had midheaven equals Saturn, that I had it, my mother made a speech in the car that my father had abandoned us. And I remember distinctly, I can see myself in the back seat of that car, my little green shorts and white t-shirt, not caring. I said, oh, let me tell you about this gold medal I won singing at the campfire contest the other night. Fascinating, isn't it? What does that tell you about me? What does that tell you about our development? My mother and I, early on. And if I look up the trigger transit for that period of time, for that backdrop solar arc, I come to August. And that's when it happened. Amazing, isn't it? Now, it's very easy in teaching solar arcs to overpromise. I'm making it sound so definite it should be computerized and put in Grand Central Station and be run by the government, and everybody contribute to the astrologers of their choice on their income tax form. Something like that. Well, it doesn't always work that way. I have to teach by overstatement of the simplistic and corroboration of it in real life. I'm sorry if some of the high potential solar arc picture signals do not manifest in my client's life. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry if there's an overdose of the difficulty. But I know that there is some purpose that is linking them all. And understanding that is the residual gift. I like to also think at a moment like this, that it's not necessarily the astrology you know, but what you know about life that pays off. These planets are guides. Solar arc is magic. And it's been so for thousands of years. And it's only of late that we have rediscovered that magic. And I'm presenting it to you today on this DVD. Now, I'd like to invite you to just a few more horoscopes looking over my shoulder. These are a little more advanced, and you'll feel proud of what you've learned. This is Oprah Winfrey's chart. Pluto is going to come from her 8th house to her midheaven big time. When will that happen? 24 Leo to 17 Libra. 6 degrees to finish Leo, plus 30 through Virgo, that's 36, plus 17 is 53, a total. Now, of course, your computer is going to do all this for you. But if Oprah Winfrey met you on an airplane and whipped out her horoscope drawing and handed it to you, you would have to be able to make that computation quickly because you have to ask about Pluto equals midheaven. That's probably one of the biggest measurements in the whole world. I remember when writing mundane forecasts for governments and working with the USSR horoscope, which was very reliable because it was the Soviet Union's birth time out of revolution, because one of the shots in Petrograd went through the window and stopped the clock. The first revolutionary shots. And I saw a tremendous situation of Pluto equals midheaven. Pluto square to the midheaven. Pluto equals midheaven. And I had to have the courage to say that the entire Soviet Union would dissemble itself. I did. It was published, and 18 months later, exact to the month, the Soviet Union ended its identity existence. That's Pluto. That's big time. Same kind of thing of John Paul becoming Pope. Pluto is big time. So here we have Pluto coming to the midheaven when Oprah Winfrey was 53 years old. At the same time, transiting Pluto came to her ascendant, exactly. See that? How was the life perspective of this fantastic lady of such dynamism going to change? Transiting Jupiter was at the same time on her moon in Sagittarius, with a reigning need to have her opinions respected, to pursue education. Miss Winfrey, 53, what a year. Well, that's when I started my multi-million-dollar school for girls and education program in South Africa. It's enormous, this program. She did it then. Isn't that marvelous? There it is. Notice here her solar arc Saturn at 2 Capricorn. 3 years before the opening of the school in 2007, Saturn equaled ascendant. So you go backwards. And I say to Oprah Winfrey, and it was 3 years in the planning? She says, precisely. That was our business plan, and we made it happen. What is the business plan? Saturn equals ascendant. Administrative, aggressive wisdom. Now, at the same time, solar arc Jupiter had come up and was opposing her natal sun precisely. You see that? From 9 Leo to 9 Aquarius, another statement of education. Amazing. I just can't get over these examples. Totally clear, totally powerful, totally sure. At the same time, transiting Neptune was conjunct Mercury right here. And Mercury is the ruler of the 9th house. International education. Okay, here's my horoscope. Let's take a look at it set up in a way that I recommend to you to set up major arc moments, big bells. Not difficult. I've already talked about solar arc midheaven equals Saturn at age 10. I always put a circle around the number of a person's age so as you don't confuse it with any other number, like degrees. At age 10, the breakup of my family is a challenge in my life. Midheaven equals Saturn. Clear as a bell, Saturn natally is opposed by Neptune, the ruler of the 10th. It's just so clear. Now, anytime that solar arc moon makes contact with an angle, the person's need cluster that drives their life comes out into the open. It has to be developed at that time, another notch or two. It's also, for a young person, one's mother. Now notice here, 27 Leo to 7 Virgo is age 10. So there are 2 arcs at age 10. While my home was dissolved, my mother became damn important, as well as my needs to feel secure, to feel important, Moon in Leo, appreciated. And my mother took care, through extraordinary support, of my talents which were surfacing at the time. Let's take a look at Pluto here. You know that this is just tremendously important. When did Pluto come to equal midheaven? 2 degrees to end Cancer, plus 30 to That makes 32, 30 to go through Leo, plus 7 is 39. Pluto equals midheaven, IC axis, at 39. What do you think happened? You tell me. Relocation? Yes. New home? Yes. You're avoiding the issue. New family? I left my family. Interestingly, my daughter was the same age I was when my father left my family. Things like this happen. So at age 39, I left my wife and daughter. If we go to the Sun and Jupiter, which is very powerfully focused here in my 7th house, this is public benevolence, I think, and we go from 10 degrees of Capricorn to 7 degrees of Pisces, and you can do that in a flash. What would a sextile be? It would be 10 Pisces from 10 Capricorn minus 3 degrees. So at 57, you'd have Sun equals midheaven. That's how fast you can do it. Zip, zip, zap, with experience. You know that I have a very reliable solar arc because I was born at the end of December. So it is even 1 degree for 1 year. Now, you can't do better than Sun equals midheaven in a textbook statement. I would say that. I planned my book, Synthesis in Counseling and Astrology, that 1,000-page guide, that textbook, to be published that day, that week, when I had Sun equals midheaven exactly. I persuaded my publisher to cooperate with this. The writing was done in 135 consecutive days, sometime beforehand. I met the deadline, we got it out. And the rest is history. I'm very fortunate, but I cooperated with the signal. That's how I used astrology to plan my life. That's how I try to help clients, if they have a plan, to invigorate it with confidence and direction. Notice that the Jupiter natally is 4 degrees behind the Sun. Well, after the Sun goes across the midheaven, 4 years later, Jupiter will go across the midheaven. Now that's 4 degrees of orb. I mean, my goodness, I had so many years there of success and recognition. Let's look over here at Uranus. Uranus coming to the ascendant is really powerful. This is bzzz, all kinds of disruptions. We've already talked about individuation, breaking up the reciprocity of marriage. Uranus came to my ascendant 25 degrees to end Taurus plus 30 at age 55. That 30 is the Gemini intercepted there. And so we have 55 years Uranus equals ascendant. I can't tell you anymore how difficult that was in my life. I retired from a career as an opera singer. I returned to my career as an astrologer, and I did my best to become a new individual. There was much disappointment attached to all of that aspiration, but that's the way life is, and I learned a lot. The freedom from that occurred when there was a trigger progression, a secondary progressed moon coming to my 4th cusp, 1 full cycle. I remember looking into the mirror and saying, well, we got to reinvent you. And I went to the phone and I called up the publisher of Llewellyn, my friend, and I said, I want to write another book. He said, when will we have it? And that brought me back to the new me. But I also noticed that 10 years later, solar arc Uranus would be opposed my sun. And that is a threat to marriage. But at age 65 or 70, isn't there a prevailing wisdom of trying to hold things together somehow within a different value spectrum, perhaps? I thought that was the mature thing for me to do. All right? Now I'm going to show you one more horoscope, and then we'll have some closing comments about it. Going back to Prince William, look at this chart. This is the solar arc chart for Prince William. Solar arc Uranus came to his ascendant last year. Solar arc midheaven has come to his Uranus next year. So there is a bracket of 2 years of gradualism that will change his life. Notice that solar arc moon, we just talked about it in relation to an angle. Here it is at 2 Leo, exactly in touch with 2 Scorpio on the midheaven. This is very, very important. The moon rules Cancer in the 7th. This has to do with what? Tell me. A woman, marriage, the new life. Upon his Saturn return, transiting Saturn on Saturn, that's when, between the ages of 27 and 29, practically everyone's life changes direction and or level. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. Transiting Pluto at 4 Capricorn right now, as we speak in February 2011. That transiting Pluto is opposed his moon at 4 Cancer. Now this very, very sensitive, emotionally jarred young prince, from the time when his mother was killed in that car crash, through his study of art, look at that, Neptune on the ascendant, at university, he is facing marriage. But he's also facing what we will not know for a while, probably some very private talks with his father and his grandmother about his becoming king sooner than later. Personal opinion. So look here. Moon equals midheaven, midheaven equals Uranus, Uranus equals ascendant. Are you ready for action? And be proud of yourself. If you can follow this after just this presentation on this DVD of solar arcs, you are doing very well. I'm often asked, what are my favorite arcs? Can you imagine? What a question. But I understand the thrust of that question. What kind of energies do I personally identify with? What do I like to see gracing the lives of my clients? And I think I would answer Pluto-Uranus, or Uranus-Pluto. Why? This is what I call the Jesus throwing over the tables in the temple image, arc. Things get turned around, get disrupted, altered, all for the benefit of your personal progress. And if you're ready for that kind of stuff, enjoy it. Saturn-Pluto is probably the most difficult. Pluto-Saturn. It's necessary loss for eventual new gain. And the hard work involved to make that transition puts hair on your chest. Pluto-Neptune is intriguing. Pluto-Neptune, I always present it with a caution. I say to my client, this might seem strange for me to inquire about, but was there a special time in your life here, 1993, from August to maybe February of 94, just making it up, of course, although I have measured it to that time period, when you studied the occult, the esoteric, the specialized, the amorphous, and I keep going until I see them ready to respond. They do. And they'll say, yes, I was studying the occult feverishly. Why? Looking for answers in my dilemma here with my spouse. A businessman will say, yes, I went to the jungle to work with a witch doctor there. Don't you tell anyone, Mr. Till, but I went there to learn drumming to help me with my stress. And I swear I have had one lady say that she went to Haiti to study voodoo to get a doll to work on her husband. I want to reiterate as we close here a terribly important premise that I have resurrected several times in this discussion. And that is nothing significant, really, happens in your life without an arc to an angle, to the ruler of an angle, or to the sun and moon. Those are guidelines that cannot be denied. You have to have a way of looking at transits quickly over a long period of time. And I've mentioned earlier, and I'm going to reiterate here, that you can get this ephemeris of the Mars through Pluto for the first of every month for 75 or 100 years from my book. And look how worn out those pages are just from the turning. This has my vibes in it. That's why I don't get a new one. Of course I could get a new one, but I don't want a new one. I want this one with my perspiration and, thoughts of different countries noted in here and experiences. I love that book. When you know your way around, a book like this is a very good map. Also in this book are the 1,600 images of solar arcs to midpoints. Follow this up, please. It's invaluable. Work on your own horoscope first. Work hard on it. Work to achieve an objectification of it. See the energies of these arcs as they have developed you in your quest to fulfill your reigning need. Get comfortable with your horoscope. Know it well. You will find you create a bit of distance from the emotions of it. Then as you start to work more knowingly with clients, you're not going to just say, what happened when? But you will say, I suggest that what occurred here was very important for your education. Or, what was the romance that keeps reminding itself in your mind now, that took place when you were 19? How do you carry forward significances from that brutal time you had in your divorce at age 26? Learn to talk that way. The next DVD in this series is going to give you some real good tips about how to talk about the difficult and where that conversation can lead. You're anticipating development within the person's reality experience. Your questions will assume development. They assimilate the energies that you have now begun to understand and see. You will be quite knowing about it all. And I welcome you to this circle of understanding. Your astrology will come to life.